Welcome to the ANEW Insight Podcast, empowering and inspiring your journey to optimal health. Hosted by Dr. Supatra Tovar, clinical psychologist, registered dietitian, fitness expert, and author of Deprogram Diet Culture. Rethink your relationship with food, heal your mind, and live a diet-free life. I follow my guests' journey to optimal health, providing you with the keys to unlock your own wellness path. Tune in and evolve with us. Hello and welcome to the ANEW Insight Podcast. I'm Dr. Supatra Tovar, and I am so honored to have health psychologist. She also has a master's in nutritional science like me, and creator of emotional brain training, Dr. Laurel Mellin, with us today. Dr. Laurel, how are you?
So thrilled to be here. I got to meet you, a week ago while I was giving the talk for the Los Angeles County Psychological Association. And this wonderful woman comes up afterwards and is talking. I said, wow, I got to get to know you.
Oh, I felt the same way. I was so impressed. Dr. Laurel gave her keynote address about a week and a half ago, and it was really mind-blowing, really inspirational. And so I got brave and ran up to her after and asked her to be on my podcast. Learned also that she has a master's in nutritional science like me, which is just so rare. So I cannot wait to pick your brain, Dr. Laurel. And then before I do that, though, I'm going to read a little bit so that people can know a little bit more about you, and then we'll get right into our questions.
Great.
Dr. Laurel Mellin is a health psychologist. She also has a master's in nutrition, like I said, and she is the creator of emotional brain training. We're going to call it EBT moving forward, which is a groundbreaking method that helps people rewire their brain's response to stress and build emotional resilience. With decades of experience in clinical and academic settings, she has developed a practical system that empowers individuals to shift from stress overload to well-being by targeting the emotional circuits that drive behavior. Her work bridges the gap between neuroscience and everyday mental health, offering tools that address the root causes of emotional distress, overeating, addiction, and burnout. Dr. Mellin is also a best-selling author and continues to lead programs that bring brain-based healing to the public and to professionals alike. It is such an honor to have you on the podcast, Laurel.
Happy to be here.
I love to explore people's backgrounds and what brought them to where they are today. And it sounds like you've had a similar route to me, going into nutritional science and then transitioning and expanding your practice into a doctorate. Tell me what your initial inspirations were to go into this field, and how did you transition to where you are today?
Wow, that's a long time. I'm 76 and I started when I was 28 as a faculty member or young faculty member at UCSF and was there for 40 years on the faculty developing EBT. I started with my own pain, and I think that's a beautiful place to start because I don't think anyone would love treating obesity and eating issues if they hadn't suffered. I'm a big believer in that moment of suffering or whatever it takes so that you really can empathize and really have a passion. And I've had a tremendous passion for that. And so I started with nutrition. My father was diabetic. I had my own food circuit that I encoded at age 11 when I was being teased. And I reached for some cinnamon rolls and I encoded what we'll talk about, which is a survival circuit, which biochemically drove me to be out of control of food and then to move into a body circuit, which is when you judge your body. And I suffered for that for 20 years. And I actually used EBT, the method I'll talk about now, to take the wires that were causing that and actually erase them. They're emotional wires, and you have to use emotional tools, so you can't do it with mindfulness or thinking. So then I went in and I said, I got lucky. I was in this position where they didn't know really what to do with me because back then I was a nutritionist and nutrition was a new field. So they said, well, we have to have a nutritionist. And so I started studying the root causes of obesity in children. And I went back in the literature to I knew that cognitive behavioral was not really doing it. It wasn't getting to the root cause. And I went back in the literature in 1940. This woman named Hilda Brooke, who was about 90 pounds sopping wet. She was this little tiny psychiatrist at Baylor. She had written an article saying it's about the connection early on in life. And so I started developing the emotional connectivity tools. And as a scientist, we have to study everything, but things tend not to work, right? You get your hopes up, and then, well, all of a sudden we're seeing the kids were losing weight and keeping it off, not because they were dieting, because they biochemically didn't want the food. And so I dedicated my career to that. And then I went to adult obesity. And then it turns out the same thing applies for most health related problems. And so there goes the 45 years. So it's been pretty exciting.
Oh my goodness. If y I do agree with you. I think that there is a personal road that we all take to become healers, and usually it is something very personal. For me, I witnessed somebody very, very close to me with an eating disorder and had extreme helplessness in terms of watching her suffer and not be able to help her. That was my inspiration. And then for me, it was really struggling in my 30s and early 40s with dieting, weight loss, weight gain, that whole cycle. And that's really what helped drive my educational journey. So, talk about those circuits that you mentioned. I think that's really fascinating. And I think a lot of people are going to resonate with this and maybe gain some new insight into it.
I hope so, but the message that of all of this, because we'll be talking about neurophysiology and neuroplasticity right now, is that currently the system is not treating the root cause. And if you have a problem, and I just will say, as a woman who grew up at a certain age with the women's movement, that if you have a problem that more women are concerned about than men, and are suffering from, in terms of the suffering aspect of this than men, so we believe from the literature, can you imagine having a problem where there was a known root cause, which there has been since 2008? It's been really clear since 2008 that it's the stress circuitry in the emotional brain that gets encoded through no fault of our own, that cannot be rewired by thinking or doing. And then this is happening to women. Women are getting they're getting to self-blame. They're getting into doing things that aren't healthy to themselves. It's hard to accept their body because these circuits are not being rewired. But here's the idea. Even though some people are more genetically inclined to obesity than others, as a human race, we are all inclined to going to extreme with food in stress, mainly overeating. And that's because our hunter-gatherer ancestors, when they had stress, it wasn't psychological stress. They didn't live long enough to get psychologically stressed out like the rest of us do. And they didn't have as much stress coming in. It was actually that they were starving. And so there's 8 major chemicals that all of us who study obesity, there's these 8 chemicals. Mainly they are cortisol, dopamine, insulin, ghrelin, leptin, serotonin, GLP-1, and PYY. These major chemicals that we know are associated with overeating and weight gain and hungry all the time, all go haywire when we're in stress. And in this environment, most people are stressed and don't even know it. Sometimes we just go numb or we go into a false high. I go low, so I know it because I get anxious, but we're in stress. And so these 8, because the stress circuits in our brain that activate all these chemicals to go in the wrong direction are making us overeat. And what we need to do to have a new paradigm where actually we stand up and say, hey, let's treat the root cause, is we actually teach very simple, very powerful, very universal tools, specifically a tool I'll call out by name, which is called the cycle tool.
Mm.
And with that tool, you can identify the precise circuit that is causing you to overeat, and you can basically melt it. Basically,
Wow.
you can identify it and you can erase it, and then you can encode a new circuit with the message of your choosing. And we want everyone who's struggling with overeating or weight gain or weight regain or even taking medications, because people are doing that now, to have these tools as fundamental to their weight care.
Oh, Think that this is phenomenal. So, really want to get into the weeds with that, but give people the overview of exactly what EBT is. If you could explain it like you're giving me the elevator pitch for it.
Okay. Well, emotional brain training is a program. You can't just get an app and do it, although there's an app, because it is about your relationship with yourself. In other words, you get tools that you use with your thinking brain because you have to follow a certain pattern of a technique that you learn, and it's in the app. But the circuits that are causing the biochemical drive to judge your body, to disconnect from yourself, to over and under eat, to punish rather than relax into connecting with yourself are in the unconscious mind, the emotional brain. Okay. So what happens is you can't get into the emotional brain up until now unless you went to a therapist. And we
Mhm.
want people to go to a therapist and use EBT, but we also want them between sessions to be empowered to use the skills themselves. So in the emotional brain, there are circuits that are encoded by your experience. And everyone who's listening or watching right now, you know, there was a moment you can remember where all of a sudden food was important to you. It wasn't just to eat because you were hungry, but you had this drive. You either shut down your mind and just went into the eating, or you maybe had a strong drive that you had to do it because you were anxious or depressed or whatever. That is not a psychological problem. Fundamentally, is that somehow a circuit, some old circuit, got encoded in your brain when you were stressed. So you had this big fight or flight circuit going here, like it was for me when I came home from school at age 11 and I was being bullied and I didn't know what to do and what to do about it. I was so ashamed, and there were cinnamon rolls there on the counter, the big ones with the white frosting on top, and I ate 3 of them. And then I felt so, ashamed because I was sneaking food is what I was doing. But what I didn't realize is that in that moment, this fight or flight circuit combined with a little puny food circuit that I had because I didn't have any food drives or I just they were it was just food, but it looked kind of good. Comes together and boom, if you don't process it emotionally before you go to bed that night, you will be stuck with a circuit in your emotional brain, specifically in the amygdala, that is extremely sensitive to stress. So I could get in a tiny bit of stress and I would have this fight or flight drive as if I was gonna die if I didn't get that food.
Mm.
And so these circuits need to be pulled apart. So the program is this: you need to be in a group. You cannot do this as a lone island because this is the emotional brain. The best of all worlds, your therapist would be teaching this to you. And we're training psychologists, other mental health professionals, and others in EBT now. But there's also a website where you can go and you get the app and you are with other people and you practice these tools. You learn by listening to other people. You learn by practicing it with other people, and it's also really fun to do it because in about 5 minutes, someone can find their circuit in their brain and begin to rewire it, and then both people get very excited. So you start by learning how to get out of stress and go all the way to feeling great. Now, feeling great is called joy. And there are 5 levels of stress in the brain. We number 1, where your thinking brain is in charge and your chemicals are great. That circuit isn't being activated. You don't even care about the extra food because the chemicals aren't forcing it. You don't judge your body when you're in that state. And then it goes downhill from there. It's feeling good. Right here, you're in the limbic system and you're starting to get really out of control. And then the reptilian brain, all the way 4 and 5. So there's 5 levels of stress in your brain. For the first month or so, all you do is train your brain, you just do it because the brain only changes by experience, so you have to actually feel like you're stressed at times, and you use these beautiful skills that just work 92% of the time, they're very reliable, and they get you to that spark of joy where the chemicals shut off. And that's
Mm.
called resilience.
And what are the skills? How are they doing
The
this?
skills are they just identify their number 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. They touch on the app, and they essentially if you're usually at 4, most people are at 4 most of the time, you do something kinda strange, and it's exactly what your mother told you not to do. So you go back to your mother and say, "I know you meant well, but the fact is you need to complain about what's bothering you. And
Mm.
you need to complain for about 5 sentences because that's enough for your brain to work better than an fMRI. An fMRI will not tell you why you overeat because it's coming from the emotional brain. You've got to get it out of the emotional brain or the unconscious mind up, okay? But you just complaining like a good soldier and saying, "The situation is, I ate last night and I was out of control, and then I blame myself afterwards, and it just feels terrible." That's enough to activate the circuit.
Wow.
And then after that, you will normally, if you do that and you don't have EBT, you'll start overthinking, you'll go into numbness, or you'll just distract yourself by eating something. Because once you activate that circuit, you hit the emotional wall. You're going to go into some kind of a mood, anxiety, depression, numbness, or something, and that stops the change. But
Mm.
what EBT does is it's a certain formula of emotions: angry, sad, afraid, guilty. And what it is, it breaks that barrier down, and literally your unconscious mind is at your service. And all those times you've thought, how do I really, what's wrong with me anyway? Why am I overeating? If you answer that from your thinking brain, you will be off because the message in the unconscious mind is usually different. So you
Okay.
just complain, you do this emotional dance we teach you how to do. It takes a few minutes, like 2 or 3 minutes, and then the brain actually wants you to heal, but you've got to stop thinking so much. Surrender to using this tool that will go into the unconscious mind, and literally you learn how to pause and wait for these words to come up. And then all you do is say, "Does that ring true?" And if those words ring true, you have magic because you have the message from your emotional brain, which is it's all over the place, emotional brain, match the words in your thinking brain. So when they match, you ever have that aha feeling like, "Oh, yeah, that really rings true." Well, physiologically, that means you have brought the unconscious message from that circuit that's been making you miserable up to the conscious mind, and then you just hit it in a certain way until it is erased. It's erased when you look at the food like a hot fudge sundae or even like a sandwich at lunch when you're really not hungry and you say, I don't think I need it. So the chemicals have been driving you all along. And when that happens to you, when you rewire your food circuit, because everyone has at least 4 circuits, and then they have to do a little bit more work to raise the set point or the habit of their brain so they don't regain the weight. But when you rewire your first circuit and you have that feeling in your body, that's why all therapists who are trained in EBT all go through the program. They go through at least 12 weeks of the program where they learn how to rewire their own circuits because we all have them. I mean, if it's not one thing, it's another, and there's some trauma, there's some whatever. But when you rewire that circuit and you look at that food and you're not taking a weight loss drug, if you want to, you can, but you're not taking a weight loss drug, and you say, "It's so unappealing." You have validation all along that it was never a psychological problem. It causes distress and psychology, but fundamentally, it was just that circuit, and somehow you actually got into a program where you could learn the tools to erase it, and it's very empowering.
Oh, I love this. And when we were in the conference, you guys, she gave us some case studies, and we're going to talk about that in the second half of this podcast and also talk about some more success stories because we got to watch some case studies happen live as they were going through the process. And it was really powerful. My question is, how did you discover the science of this? How did you track this? And how did the research then lead to EBT?
Wonderful question. I started with knowing that it wasn't cognitive or behavioral, it was emotional. And I mean emotions as physiology, emotions as psychology. And so I just started working with children talking about magic words. How do I feel and what do I need? And even with that, they were just saying it as their family. The whole family was starting to say, how do I feel and what do I need? And this mother came to me. This is maybe only 3 years of studying EBT. And she said to me, "What did you do to my daughter?" And I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "She was stealing money from my purse. She was going out and hoarding candy. she was just miserable. And now after we're using these emotional tools, she doesn't care about the food and she wants to go out and play. And then the woman said, and I want what she has. And that's when we moved it to adults. But so I began to really listen to my patients who were adults and how they modified that because adults had more stress. And I worked on that and I found a way of this cycle tool. I discovered the cycle tool at the University of California, San Francisco in the Department of Family and Community Medicine. And what happened was I wrote some best-selling books and please don't buy those books because they're not as up to date as the new ones on EBT. But the issue is someone at UCSF who was a physiologist and neuroscientist named Igor Mitrovich had a wife who was also a scientist at UCSF. And this man was the sweetest man, but he was totally stressed and he had some body size issues. And so she gave him one of my best-selling books for his birthday, and he read the book, and she says, "This woman's also at UCSF. Let's see what she did." And so he reads the book, and he tried the tool, and he says, "Oh my gosh, how did she figure this out?" So he calls me on the phone and says, "You're not a neuroscientist." I wasn't a health psychologist yet. And he says, "How did you figure this out?" And I said, "I listened to my patients and I looked at the science the best I could." And he brought it to the next level. He's our scientific director. And it took until 2007 when he had rewired his circuits. And all of a sudden, he had this aha moment where he said, "This is why it's working. It's
Mm.
working because we're rewiring the stress response. We're rewiring the emotional brain, which is the seat of the soul." And then we went from there, taking another 15 years to bring it to the point that it can be in an app, it can be people can use it, the therapists can learn it, and the participants can go online and get into groups and learn it. So it's been challenging. I would say the last 4 years were very challenging because I found that we needed to go all the way to joy. You can't just go to a mediocre mood. And also the trauma circuits are typically like I had trauma when I reached for my food. Now, I wouldn't say that I was abused by or the different kinds of extreme abuse that we think about that are very common, particularly in people who have a more extreme body size. Okay, it's
Mhm.
very common.
Yes.
The human brain is extremely stress sensitive, and even a slight or a shame that you're feeling, or like that's why body shaming is so damaging because that goes right into your emotional brain, into your amygdala, where we have these circuits, and it essentially creates such chemical chaos that we're going to have one problem or another, a mood problem, a food problem, or whatever. So essentially, what we're doing is using this procedure that the psychologists learn to give this service, but also you learn it in an app. So you can use it not exactly in the same way that you would with your therapist, but similar. And so essentially, we got to the point that I had to admit that we had to get this method out more widely. Now, 500,000 people have used it so far, but everyone in our society should have these tools. But so we finally got it to the point that the circuits that are, I just want you to put your fingers way down here where it's the reptilian brain. Now, this is what is required to rewire the circuits in an emotional brain because you've got to activate it, you've got to stay present to your emotions as you essentially dissemble the old message and put in a new message that's healthy. I get my safety from loving and accepting my body. The old one was I get my safety from hating my body and denigrating my body no matter what. You're going to change that message.
Love
But
it.
to do that, you've got to have a thinking brain that's working, right? When the reptilian brain is like pouring chemicals all over you. And so we modified the procedures until you could use an app to get pretty much down there. You'll get better results with your psychologist or your psychotherapist, but you get right down there to deep in the brain and you've hit the circuit when it goes poof. And then you notice again that whatever that pattern was, whether it's anxiety or perfectionism or people pleasing or distancing or overspending or whatever it is, where the drive stops.
Wow. Laurel. Oh my gosh. There is so much there. You've created a method that encapsulates neuroplasticity. I think a lot of people way back in the past, this is older, that they didn't believe that you could rewire the brain. We know that's a fact now that you absolutely can. We are studying mirror neurons. We are understanding so much more about the brain than ever before, but this is a direct application. And I don't think, I mean, maybe EMDR gets a little bit into that, but not in this direct way like you have developed. This is so fascinating. I cannot believe we're out of time for this half of this podcast. I have 80,000 more questions for you, so hang on. But it really just incredible work that you've done. I'm so honored to have you on the podcast. And everybody, you have to come back for the second half of this amazing podcast. So tune in next time for the next half with health psychologist and creator of emotional brain training, Dr. Laurel Mellin. Thanks for tuning into the ANEW Insight Podcast. Please remember, the contents shared on this podcast is for entertainment purposes only and does not constitute medical advice. You can find us anywhere podcasts are streaming, on YouTube at my.anew.insight and at anew-insight.com under the ANEW Insight Podcast tab. And follow us on our socials at my.anew.insight on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and Threads for more updates. Tune in next time and evolve with us.